Good morning and welcome to International Trade News at 11. I'm Preston Horner.
And I'm Sebastian Custodia. Tonight we have a very special report on a country that has been the host of many Amerindian civilizations like the Mayans and the Aztecs, and has played a role as a United States trade partner, Mexico.
Our program tonight focuses on Mexico because of its geographic proximity to our country and its important significance to U.S. international trade. In the 16th century, Hernán Cortés and the Spanish conquered the Aztecan society in Mexico. After this point, Mexico served as a viceroyalty of New Spain until the early 19th century. Mexico finally achieved independence from Spain on September 16, 1821, after an 11-year armed conflict.
Mexico experienced more struggle throughout the rest of the 19th century, which led to economic and social concerns of large-scale underemployment, inequitable income distribution, low wages, and poverty.
Since the 1910 revolution, though, the Mexican economy has been on the rise. Today, Mexico is a free market economy with a focus on agriculture and automotive industry. The per capita income is about one-third of that of the U.S., and since NAFTA in 1994, Mexico's share of U.S. imports has risen from 7 to 12%, and its share of Canadian imports has doubled to 5%. Now we'll pass it off to Laura to give more insight into the population and economic growth in Mexico.
Thanks, Sebastian. My name is Laura Moreno, coming to you live from Mexico, as you can see through these beautiful adobe walls. We're going to discuss the population rate in Mexico. First off, the population of Mexico has been recorded at about 1.15 million people as of July 2012. And yet, the population growth rate is still growing at 1.086%, predominantly in Mexico City. The population gradually evolves over time based on fertility, mortality, and international migration trends. According to the population pyramid, we see that the highest age bracket that makes up Mexico ranges from an infant to a person of about 30 years old. After, we see that for both men and women, the population begins to lessen. As males are listed on the left side and females on the right, each bar represents 5-year age groups, with the youngest age groups at the bottom and the oldest at the top. Well, why is this important? Since 1994, the Mexico's share of U.S. imports has increased from 7% to 12% since the implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement. Mexico's share of Canadian imports has doubled to 5%, and Mexico now has free trade agreements with over 50 countries, including Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and European countries as well. Even Japan, putting more than 90% of trade under free trade agreements. What's making Mexico stay afloat? Their industries revolving around service, manufacturing, and agriculture. Let's go to Sebastian to talk about Mexico's imports and exports in these industries.
Thanks, Laura. That was great. As we already said, Mexico is the world's 12th largest economy, and trade plays a huge part in this. With petroleum being the country's largest mineral resource, it is not surprising that oil and oil products are among Mexico's largest exports. Oil products, along with its other major exports, precious metals, mercury, zinc, natural gases, and food products, amounted to about $375 billion in exports in 2012. Expectedly, the U.S. is Mexico's largest export partner, accounting for around 78.6% of total exports. Imports play an equal role in the Mexican economy, with the country importing around $380 billion in 2012. The country's largest imports include paper, aircrafts, industrial machinery, tobacco, and lumber. Again, the U.S. is the largest partner in this aspect, accounting for 49.7% of Mexico's imports. Following the U.S., the European Union, China, and Japan are also big import partners of Mexico. Now back to Laura with a Juan-on-Juan lesson on labor and sectors in Mexico.
Thanks, Sebastian. That was wonderful. Let's look at how the imports and exports has resultantly affected Mexico. The total GDP value of Mexico represents 1.86% of the world economy. The gross domestic product in Mexico reached an all-time high worth $1,155.32 billion US dollars in 2011. That's a great improvement from the record low of $13.1 billion in 1960. Mexico's GDP plunged 6.2% in 2009 as world demand for exports dropped, asset prices tumbled, and remittances and investment declined. GDP grew a positive 5.6% in 2010 due to an increase in exports to the U.S. However, in 2011, growth slowed to 3.9% and 3.8% in 2012. The administration continues to face many economic challenges, including improving the public education system, upgrading infrastructure, modernizing labor laws, and fostering private investment in the energy sector. Calderón, Mexico's president, has stated that his top economic priorities remain reducing poverty and creating jobs. The Mexican economy is primarily a service economy to the extent that 66% of GDP and over 50% of employment in 1999 was accounted for by the services sector. Much of the decline in agricultural employment over the past 60 years has been picked up by the services sector. Hospitality, personal and professional services account for most of the services that are performed within the economy. The manufacturing sector is the next most important sector. Mexico is currently the second largest supplier of electronics to the United States, after China. The oil industry, though, still remains as the largest industry in Mexico. Mexico's unemployment rate is 4.5% as of 2012, and in comparison to the world, Mexico is country number 44. The population below the poverty line is 51.3%, and this is based on a food-based definition of poverty. Asset-based poverty amounted to more than 47% in 2010. Alrighty, Preston and Sebastian, back to you.
Thanks, Laura. Mexico and the United States specifically are tied not only by geographic location, but by trade and investment, migration, security, environmental, and health issues. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, has been in effect since January 1994, and it plays a key role in the economic relationships between Mexico and the United States and Canada. From the 1930s through part of the 1980s, Mexico maintained a strong protectionist trade policy in an effort to be independent of any foreign power as a means to industrialization. Mexico established a policy of import substitution in the 1930s, consisting of a broad general protection of the entire industrial sector. Mexico placed high restrictions on foreign investment and controlled the exchange rate to encourage domestic industrial growth. Mexico also nationalized the oil industry during this time. These protectionist economic policies remained in effect until the country began to experience a series of economic challenges caused by a number of factors. The 1980s were marked by inflation and a declining standard of living. One reason for these economic issues was the peso exchange rate. In the 1980s, Mexico utilized a strict exchange rate that increased imports but decreased exports because other countries were unwilling to exchange their currency for the overvalued peso, causing a trade deficit. Early 1990s in Mexico were marked by a large increase in foreign investment as investor confidence in the Mexican economy grew to the prospect of NAFTA. However, signs that Mexico's economy was not as fundamentally strong as it appeared began to surface after the assassination of Mexican presidential candidate Luis Donaldo Colosio, March 1994. The shock of the assassination resulted in a subsequent outflow of foreign exchange reserves and growing concerns about currency devaluation. In response to these concerns, the Mexican government issued short-term dollar-indexed notes to finance the growing current account deficit. Before NAFTA, tariffs on U.S. goods were 150% higher than other countries, and there were many non-tariff barriers on transportation across the border. After NAFTA, Mexico's trade with the United States has grown considerably since 1994. Mexico had a trade deficit of $1.3 billion with the United States in 1994, the year after NAFTA implementation. In subsequent years, the trade balance shifted to a surplus as exports to the United States increased. When the U.S. economy is booming, immigration from Mexico increases, while in a recession, like the one started in 2008, immigration decreases. The Mexican immigrants have been sending remittances back to Mexico mainly to the lower class. 16% of Mexican households have direct ties with immigrants in the U.S. Remittances have declined in the recent years, though, as migrants have been bringing their families to the United States. The net migration rate in Mexico is negative 3.11 migrants per 1,000 people in the population. Now we're going to send it to Michael to talk about foreign direct investment.
Thanks, Preston, and bienvenidos a Mexico. I'm here at the Walmart headquarters, and have you ever tried a tamale? They're muy delicioso. Anyway, NAFTA, proximity to the United States, and economic stability make Mexico an attractive location for FDI. Additional reforms to improve competition, labor conditions, and education quality are needed to increase competitiveness and encourage even more FDI. FDI in Mexico for 2010 was $17.7 billion, with $4.9 billion coming from the US, and $11.2 billion and $8.7 billion from the EU and Netherlands, respectively. Accounting for a significant portion of this inflow is a $5.7 billion all-share transaction by Dutch brewer Heineken for their purchase of Mexican FEMSA's beer operations. Investment growth compared to 2009 was 16.57% below 2008 levels, which is still below 30% of the year 2009. For the year 2010, the U.S. provided 27.6% of all FDI in Mexico, benefiting over 23,000 companies. U.S. FDI is largely concentrated in the manufacturing, 46%, and commercial, 19%, sectors. The U.S. shares in Mexico's FDI has been decreasing over the last decade, from 72% in 2000 to 27% in 2010, while EU's share has gained ground, increasing from 18% to 60% during the same period. In 2010, 43%, or $1.9 billion, of U.S. investment in Mexico was directed to the 6 Mexican border states. These states are where the majority of the maquiladoras are located and receive 59% of U.S. manufacturing investment in Mexico. In the past 10 years, U.S. foreign direct investment in Mexico totaled more than $123 billion, concentrated largely in the manufacturing and financial sectors. U.S. firms have an important presence in Mexico, such as Ford, GM, Walmart, Delphi, and Boeing, which have recently announced investments for over $5 billion. Mexico has agreements for mutual promotion and protection of investment, or APRIs, with 27 countries, and double taxation agreements with 34. Back to you guys in the studio. I'm going to go try a delicacy called tacos de lengua.
Thank you for watching our program tonight. I hope you learned as much as we did. It's like we're back at school again, isn't it, Sebastian?
From all of us here at International Trade News, have a good night.